She didn't say goodbye. She didn't explain. She just stopped replying. That moment right there, that long, empty silence, is where most men lose the war. Not because she left, but because they couldn't. They couldn't leave it alone. They had to reach out, had to ask what went wrong, had to prove their value through words, through questions, through digital desperation. And in doing so, they exposed what they didn't know was still inside them, the hunger for validation, the fear of being abandoned, the need to be chosen. But a man who is truly chosen never needs to ask. Her silence isn't rejection. It's a mirror. A mirror most men are too afraid to look into. Because it doesn't reflect her feelings, it reflects their own emptiness, their inability to sit with not knowing, their lack of self-control, their illusion of dominance crumbling the moment it isn't fed. She pulled away. Let her. That's not your failure. That's her move, and it's in the silence after her move that the real test begins. See, the modern woman doesn't always walk away to leave you. Sometimes she walks away to measure you. Not your height, not your job, not even your looks. She's measuring your emotional center. Is it solid, or does it tremble the moment her attention is removed? You think she's ignoring you, but she's observing. She wants to see what happens when your source of dopamine vanishes. Do you spiral? Do you beg? Do you fill the silence with noise? Or do you stand still, calm, unchanged? Most men try to fill that gap. They send a second message, then a third, maybe a meme, then a compliment, then a question. Did I do something wrong? Every one of those signals transmits the same frequency. I need you to tell me I still matter. But a man who needs to be told he matters doesn't. What she's doing, whether consciously or not, is peeling back the curtain. She's seeing if you are truly whole or just pretending to be. That's what silence does. It separates the grounded from the grasping. And here's the thing. No one teaches young men when a woman pulls away, your move isn't to chase. Your move is to stop. Not to punish her, not to manipulate her. But because chasing something that is running away from you isn't strategy, it's submission. Let her walk. Let her sit in her own echo. If she's testing your strength, this is how you pass. If she's genuinely losing interest, then no amount of chasing would fix that anyway. You don't convince someone to see your worth. You live it quietly without performance. You don't become more visible to her by pushing. You become more powerful by disappearing. That's the paradox. She notices you more when you stop broadcasting. She wonders more when you stop explaining. She remembers you more when you stop reminding her that you exist. The mistake men make is thinking visibility equals value, so they flash it all. Their affection, their confusion, their pain. They package it and send it to her inbox. And she scrolls and scrolls and feels nothing, because value never begs. Value vanishes and makes you feel its absence. Let her feel it. You want her attention back. Don't ask for it. Become a man who doesn't need it. And in that shift, something primal changes. You're no longer the one trying to be chosen. You're the one choosing. And most women aren't ready for that. Because when you don't flinch in the silence, when you don't fill it with words, when you don't orbit her gravity, she has to face something terrifying, the fact that she might have lost a man who never needed to be found. She'll tell herself stories to fill the space you left. That you didn't care. That you moved on too fast. That you were just playing her. But underneath all that noise is the only question that matters: why didn't he chase? Most men would have. Most men always do. Because most men still believe attention is power, that her silence is a void that must be filled. But a Stoic man understands something deeper. Attention is currency, not purpose. And he never spends it recklessly, especially not on uncertainty. You don't pay to play in a rigged game. When she withdraws, the rules change. She now holds the frame, unless you refuse to enter it. That refusal is your power. It's not passive, it's active restraint. And it forces a shift, because while you're silent, she's waiting for the performance. She's seen the pattern, message, apology, emotional display, maybe even anger disguised as vulnerability, men begging her to decode their confusion. But what she hasn't seen is stillness. No movement, no noise, no signs of emotional collapse. Just a man moving forward without dragging her name behind him. That's rare. And in a world addicted to reaction, rare becomes magnetic. But this only works if your silence is real. If you're just pretending, if you're staring at your phone, hoping she breaks first, you've already lost. That's not strength. That's performance in disguise. The true Stoic response isn't waiting. It's walking, not angrily, not as punishment, just calmly because your life is already in motion. Her silence didn't slow it down. It simply reminded you to keep your eyes forward. And if she returns, she doesn't find a man paused in grief. She finds one upgraded in her absence. Sharper, stronger, more focused. Because you didn't collapse, you converted. You took the space she gave you and made it your forge. See, men talk about power, but few understand where it's built. It's not in what you say, it's in what you don't respond to. It's not in how loud you are, it's in what you can endure without noise. She ignored you. Then you were gifted a test. And your silence was the answer key. But here's where the weak fold. They confuse silence with waiting. They pace. They check social media. They craft the perfect return message. They starve themselves hoping for her crumbs. That's not Stoicism. That's starvation disguised as self-control. You don't live in limbo. You don't pause your mission. You don't hold your breath hoping she validates your worth. Your mission doesn't bend for approval. Your focus doesn't crack under absence. You keep moving. You build your body. You fortify your mind. You double down on the very life that made her notice you in the first place. Because that's the twist. The moment you stop needing her attention is the moment you become attractive again. But by then it may not even matter, because the man you become in her silence may not want her back. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but because you finally saw the truth, that your peace is too expensive to rent out for temporary affection. She pulled away. Let her. You don't chase what retreats. You don't audition for someone who walked out of the theater. You let her feel the silence she created. And when that silence echoes louder than any message you could have sent, she'll realize the one man who didn't beg was the only one worth remembering. The moment you make peace with silence, you become immune to manipulation. Not because you've hardened, but because you've seen how easily the game is played. Most women don't need to say anything to control a man. All they have to do is stop. Stop replying. Stop engaging. Stop feeding the cycle. And if a man's identity is built on being seen, he crumbles in that void. He chases shadows. He rewrites conversations in his head. He apologizes for things he didn't do just to feel worthy again. But you stay still, not because it doesn't hurt, but because pain doesn't control you anymore. That's the difference. That's the whole point of Stoic power. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being unshaken by emotion. And the moment you no longer fear the storm, you become the one who controls the weather. See, when she ignores you, you're not dealing with logic. You're dealing with energy. Women pull away to recalibrate power. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes not. But the pattern is the same. She distances. She observes. She waits to see if the man will collapse into reaction. And most do. They fall into the loop. They craft long messages hoping to explain. They try to be funny thinking it'll reopen the gate. They send music quotes, old photos, anything to remind her of what they had. But she doesn't want reminders. She wants to feel your value in your absence. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you're too centered to beg. A Stoic man doesn't compete for attention. He competes with his former self. His fight isn't for her, it's for discipline, direction, and clarity. That's what makes him different. That's what makes him rare. And women are drawn to what's rare. So here's the play most men miss when she ignores you. She's not the point anymore. The space she leaves behind is your real opportunity, not to win her back, but to win back the parts of yourself that were still dependent on her. Because if her silence breaks you, it means you gave her too much power. If her distance defines your day, it means you never built a world strong enough to stand alone. That's not love, that's slavery with a smile. And freedom only comes through fire. You let that silence burn away the weakness. You let it show you where your attachment was still leaking self-respect. You let it teach you what school never did, that composure is your compass, and the world is always testing it. Every ignored message, every cold goodbye, every unexpected silence, all of them are tests, not of your words, but of your weight. Can you stand still when nothing around you validates your worth? Can you walk forward without applause? Can you hold frame in a storm of uncertainty? That's the game. That's what separates men who get used from men who get chosen. And you know which one you were. If her silence knocked you off balance, good. Now you see where to fortify. Now you know what still controls you. Because the truth is, a woman ignoring you isn't a crisis. It's clarity. And if you use it right, it becomes your edge. Let the silence stretch. Let her wonder. Let your absence say what your words never could. Because a man who doesn't flinch when forgotten is the one who's never truly ignored. She'll scroll, she'll check, she'll glance at your stories, but she won't speak. Not yet. Because what you're doing isn't familiar. You're not chasing, you're not venting. You're not trying to remind her of the connection. You've become quiet, not passive, just still. And that stillness unsettles her. She was ready for the emotional performance, the digital monologue, the validation cycle. But instead she finds silence, strength, distance without resentment. And whether she admits it or not, she starts to question. Because when a man pulls back without bitterness, it feels different. It doesn't scream game. It whispers discipline. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that refuses to betray itself. See, most men think emotional control is repression, that if they don't react, they're bottling it up. But repression is just buried chaos. What Stoicism teaches isn't to bury, it's to redirect. You don't chase her, you chase your own edge. You let the silence drive you back to yourself. You train harder, you read deeper, you create sharper. And in every action you remind yourself who you were before her attention became a drug. Because attention is a drug, and most men are addicted without knowing it. They crave the ping of the reply, the dopamine hit of the double text, the illusion of intimacy in emojis. But you detox, not because you don't feel the pull, but because you've chosen something stronger, purpose. And purpose doesn't beg. Purpose doesn't pause for text messages. She might come back, she might not. That's not your focus anymore. You're not building a response, you're building resilience. And here's what happens when you do, she feels it. Even in silence, she feels the shift. The lack of neediness, the absence of pressure, the presence of a man who has nothing to prove. That kind of man haunts her memory, not with drama, but with the calm ache of what she couldn't shake. Because women don't miss the noise, they miss the gravity of a man who didn't orbit them, who had his own axis, his own laws, his own center of mass, And once she feels that center, once she realizes you don't revolve around her validation, something primal activates. It's not game. It's not reverse psychology. It's biology. Because security is attractive. And nothing is more secure than a man who doesn't flinch. That's what you've become. Not cold, just composed. Not detached, just discerning. And when she finally breaks the silence, if she does, you don't rush to meet it. You weigh it. You read between the lines. Because by then you've built enough inner gravity to stop measuring your worth by her engagement. Maybe she's genuine. Maybe it's just curiosity. Either way, you're no longer on the emotional leash. You've cut it. With discipline, with focus, with silence. And now, the frame belongs to you, not because you took it, but because you didn't chase it. And in that stillness, in that discipline, in that refusal to self-abandon, you became untouchable. You never announced your silence. That's why it worked. No bitter quotes, no cryptic posts, no digital theatrics to hint at your withdrawal. You didn't need to tell the world you pulled back because real strength doesn't announce itself. It just stops giving. The man who says nothing but lives louder, he becomes unforgettable. And while the noise fades around her, your absence remains. Not loud, but heavy, a subtle weight pressing on her thoughts. Because she expected your chase, and now she questions your calm. This is where most men break. They feel the itch, the urge to say something, to remind her they still exist. But reminders are for forgotten men. You're not here to remind. You're here to refine. Because this isn't just about her. It never was. This is about the discipline to become unmoved in a world addicted to reaction. Do you know how rare that is in a culture where everything demands your attention, where everyone is broadcasting emotion 24/7? You choose stillness. And that stillness makes you dangerous, not in a violent way, but in a way that says, I do not need to be seen to know I exist. You've stripped away the need to perform, and now something happens. You start to see clearly. You see that her attention was never the reward, it was the mirror, a reflection of your own instability. Every time you waited on her reply, every time her silence disrupted your focus, it wasn't love, it was emotional dependence. But now you've cut the cord, and the clarity that follows, that's your rebirth. You begin to see the difference between desire and dignity, between wanting her and needing her to want you. One is strength, the other is slavery. You chose the first. And here's what separates you from the masses. You didn't fake it. You didn't pretend to move on while secretly waiting. You didn't build some hollow lifestyle for her to watch. You built yourself, for yourself. You became the kind of man whose presence is a privilege, not a default. The kind of man who doesn't argue for his place in someone's life. He simply lives in such a way that losing him is its own punishment. Now she's watching, not liking, not commenting, but watching. Because that's what people do when they feel your energy shift. They don't congratulate you, they observe you. She sees the new sharpness in your eyes, the consistency in your habits, the quiet confidence in your walk. And somewhere between the scrolls and the silence, she remembers what most men never gave her: certainty without control. You didn't fight for attention. You didn't plead for closure. You became it. She may reach out, or she may stay in her silence. Doesn't matter. Because either way, you've reclaimed the one thing no woman can give or take from you: your frame. And frame is everything. It's not just how you act. It's how you see, how you respond, how you move. It's the invisible force that dictates your value, not to her, but to yourself. And once you've found it, no game, no silence, no emotional bait can shake it loose. So let her wonder. Let her silence stretch until it wraps around her. Let your absence echo in ways your presence never could. Because a man who doesn't break in silence becomes the one she remembers in noise. The silence didn't just reveal her. It revealed you. It showed you where your center was, how quickly you reached for reassurance, how loudly your inner void begged to be filled. But now that void is gone. Not filled with distraction, not hidden by ego, but dissolved through discipline. You didn't just resist the urge to text. You resisted the urge to explain, to prove, to perform. You let the uncertainty stand, and in doing so, you became certain. That's what power looks like. Not control over her, control over yourself. It's what separates the boys who chase from the men who choose. And here's the deeper truth. She wasn't just testing you. Life was. Every silence, every pause, every unanswered message that was life asking, are you grounded in you or in her? And most men fail because they haven't built the weight within. They rely on external validation to feel solid. And when that external force disappears, so does their identity. That's why they panic. That's why they chase. That's why they change themselves to be chosen again. But not you. You stayed who you were. Or more accurately, you finally became him. Because sometimes the only way to find your true shape is to remove the mirrors. To stop looking for reflection and start building from the inside out. That's what her silence gave you, a vacuum. A space where your voice became the only one that mattered. And in that quiet, you heard it clearly, your mission, your standard, your focus. The version of you that doesn't break, doesn't beg, and doesn't bend. Now she has to reckon with that. Because what you gave her wasn't distance, it was depth. You didn't just disappear, you evolved. And evolution doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It moves. Quietly, consistently, without announcement. She may try to come back. She might reach for the man she once knew. But what she'll find is a man she no longer recognizes. Not because you became colder, but because you became clearer. Clear in your path. Clear in your purpose. Clear in what you will and will not tolerate. You won't return to her world as a guest begging for re-entry. You'll return, if at all, as a man who carries his own kingdom. That's the shift. Not just in how you deal with her, but in how you deal with the world. You don't flinch at silence anymore. You don't interpret it as loss. You interpret it as data. She stopped talking information. She pulled back feedback. You adjust, not emotionally but strategically. You observe patterns. You see where your energy flows and where it gets wasted. And then you act. Quietly. Cleanly. Without drama. Because that's what high-value men do. They don't argue for space. They create lives so rich that others have to earn entry, and that includes her. So let her stay silent. Let her wonder who you've become. Let her question why the game stopped working, because the man who used to chase is gone. And in his place stands the one she never thought she'd meet, a man who leads without needing to be followed. You never lost her. Not really. Because to lose someone, they have to be yours to begin with. And the truth most men avoid is this: she was never fully in. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not in the way that makes silence feel like a pause instead of a verdict. She was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, watching, testing, feeling your frame. And now that you've stopped performing, she finally sees it. Not because you became louder, flashier, more exciting, but because you became still, solid, unmoved. And that's what haunts her. Because most men react, they panic, they flood her with attention when she pulls away. They try to fix what was never broken. They treat the silence like a failure instead of a filter. But not you. You passed the test by refusing to take it. And here's what makes it permanent. Your life didn't just continue. It got better, without her. That's the part they feel the most, not the absence, but the evolution. The quiet rise of a man who no longer places women at the center of his map. You placed yourself there, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity, because you finally understood if you don't build a life where you are the gravity, you'll spend your life orbiting people who don't value your mass. She wanted to see if you'd orbit. You didn't. She waited for the crack, the slip, the message. It never came. And that silence became the echo of her mistake. But you're not waiting for that realization. You're not hanging on to some future apology or emotional comeback. You've let go. Truly. Because this journey was never about her in the first place. It was about the weakness she exposed in you and your decision to confront it instead of mask it. That's what makes you rare. Not that you didn't hurt, but that you didn't flinch, that you turned rejection into reflection, that you made her absence the birthplace of your standard. Most men seek closure. You don't need it. You became it. You no longer explain your value. You demonstrate it in how you live, how you walk, how you don't reach back for people who let go first. And if she reaches out, you don't get excited. You get observant. Not because you're bitter, but because you're better. You've built something too sacred to risk on a whim. Your peace, your progress, your focus, none of it bends for casual interest. She lost access. Not because you closed the door, but because you removed the handle. And now if she wants to come back, she doesn't walk in like before. She waits, she wonders, she works. Because access to you isn't assumed anymore. It's earned. And that, my friend, is the final power play. Not revenge, not resentment, but rising so quietly, so undeniably that her silence ends up saying more about her than you. You didn't just walk away. You walked beyond. Most men crumble when she goes quiet. You built. Most men chase the closure she never offered. You created your own. Most men fold under the weight of unanswered questions. You stood taller, clearer, colder, not out of spite, but out of sovereign strength. That's the difference. That's the lesson she never meant to teach, but did anyway. Her silence forced you to become the man she claimed to want, the one she never believed you'd actually become. And now she sees the cost. Not in words, in space, not in arguments, in outcomes. She looks at your life from the outside now. The door isn't slammed shut, but it's no longer swinging open at her convenience. The access she once took for granted is now earned by effort, not emotion. Because the man who used to react to every mood, every pause, every cold reply, that man died in the fire of your silence. You let him burn. And from that, a new frame emerged. One where you don't lead with longing. One where attention isn't currency. One where you no longer trade your presence for possibility. You give to the world that gives back. Not instantly, not loudly, but consistently. She can sense it, not through the feed, through the feeling, that something has changed in the energy, that the man she once had on a string is no longer playing. She can't name it, but she knows it. And that knowing, that's your leverage now. Because when you build silently without bitterness, your presence becomes a quiet storm. Calm on the surface, unstoppable underneath. And here's the truth you carry forward: any woman who truly wants to be in your life won't test you through absence. She'll match your energy through presence, not clinging, not chasing, just consistent feminine presence. That's the only dance worth doing. Anything else? A distraction. You've transcended the games, not because you're above women, but because you're finally aligned with yourself. Your standards are not flexible for comfort. They're fixed by clarity. You know what silence taught you? That emotional discipline is rare. That restraint is seductive. That a man who doesn't try to force the outcome often shapes it anyway. Not by pressure, by posture. She might come back. She might not. It's irrelevant now. Because you didn't just get through the storm, you became it. Unbothered, unapologetic, untouchable. And if she wants to stand near that kind of power again, she'll have to meet you at the level you built in her absence. Most won't. But the few who do, they'll know they're not dealing with a man who needs them. They're dealing with a man who chose himself. And that man never loses anything worth keeping. You didn't win by getting her back. You won by getting yourself back. The part of you that waited for her reply. The part that needed her tone to be soft again before you could feel strong. The part that confused her attention with your worth. That version of you is gone. And now you live by a different code. Not because you hate women, but because you finally respect yourself. You understand now attraction isn't about pursuit. It's about gravity. And the man who centers himself, who becomes a force with or without her, begins to radiate something far more powerful than charm. Certainty. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands attention. The quiet kind. The kind that sits across the room and changes the temperature. That's what she feels now. Not noise, pressure, desperation. She feels weight. You no longer explain. You no longer chase. You no longer wonder if she'll circle back. Because you've left the orbit. And you're building something she can't compete with: peace. Purpose. A path that doesn't need anyone's applause to feel real. See, you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And now you've stopped asking. You've started becoming. And in that shift, you did something most men never manage. You reclaimed time. You stopped wasting days interpreting silence, decoding half-texts, replaying what-ifs. You took all that energy and reinvested it into muscle, into money, into mastery. You became the kind of man who doesn't wait to be understood. He becomes so clear in who he is that understanding is automatic or unnecessary. And if she returns, you don't gloat, you don't punish, you don't seek validation, you listen, you weigh, you assess. Because the door isn't locked, but it's no longer wide open. She meets a man now, not a boy playing emotional ping pong, a man with direction, with depth, with demands not of her but of himself, and she'll see what she missed. But here's the twist: you may not want her back, not out of spite, but because the man you became in her absence is simply no longer aligned with the boy she left. You outgrew her while she was gone. That's the highest form of strength, not revenge, not manipulation, but evolution. So if she returns, she finds a higher mountain, one she has to climb, one that doesn't lower itself for company. And if she doesn't, you don't descend, you don't look back, you don't stall, because the view from up here is too clear, too earned, too sacred. She ignored you, and in doing so, she introduced you to the most powerful man you'll ever know, the one inside you waiting for silence to speak. You didn't just sit through this video. You stood through your own silence. If these words reminded you of who you were before the chase, if you felt the echo of your own story in this stillness, then don't scroll in silence. Drop a comment not to be seen, but to reclaim your voice. Tell me what part hit hardest. Tell me when you finally stopped chasing. Or just say, I'm done performing. And if you're the kind of man who doesn't beg for attention, but builds in silence, then subscribe. Because this isn't just a channel, it's your mirror, your reminder, your reset. We don't chase here, we become.